Number 1. The Kerma Royal Sacrifice Pits. Imagine a burial mound 90 meters across, wider than a football pitch. Beneath the earth, honeycombed corridors of mud brick radiate outward from a central vaulted chamber. Inside that chamber, a king lies on a carved wooden bed inlaid with mica, his body resting between two ox hides. That alone would be extraordinary, but the king is not alone. Arranged in clusters along those corridors, positioned on their right sides with their heads facing east, covered in cattle hide, are over 300 other people, men, women, and children. They were not placed here against their will, at least, not in any way the bones can prove. This is Tumulus 10 in the Royal Cemetery of Kerma, in what is now northern Sudan. It dates to roughly 1750 BCE, the height of the classic Kerma period, when this Nubian kingdom had grown powerful enough to seize Egyptian forts along the lower Nile and potentially ally with the Hyksos against the pharaohs of Thebes. George Reisner's Harvard-Boston expedition first excavated the site between 1913 and 1916, uncovering 4 massive royal tumuli. He cataloged at least 850 individuals from the cemetery. Charles Bonnet and the University of Geneva spent decades from 1977 to 2003 confirming that Kerma was no Egyptian satellite. It was an independent superpower with its own architecture, its own burial customs, and its own ideas about what a king deserved in death. The cattle offerings alone were staggering. Grave 253 contained approximately 4,899 cattle skulls arranged in a ring around the mound. But it is the human remains that stop you. Margaret Judd and Joel Irish published a bioarchaeological study in Antiquity in 2009, analyzing roughly 100 sacrificial and 190 non-sacrificial individuals. Their conclusion was disturbing in a way that goes beyond simple violence. There were no defensive fractures, no blunt force trauma, no parry injuries on the forearms, no evidence of restraint. The sacrificial victims showed the same stress markers, the same dental health, and the same femur lengths as the non-sacrificial population. Craniometric analysis confirmed they were local Nubians, not foreign prisoners of war. They came from the same community as the king they were buried with. The implication is that they went willingly, or at least that whatever system compelled them left no marks on the skeleton. Research by Buzon and colleagues confirmed the victims included a cross-section of society, not a slave class. This was retainer sacrifice, a practice where loyalty to the king extended past death. The Kerma period spanned over 1,000 years, and as the kingdom grew more powerful, the sacrifices grew larger. The corridors were not mass graves, they were engineered afterlives, with spatial organization separating the royal chamber from the retainer corridors. The architecture was deliberate, the positioning was ritualized, and the scale was rivaled only by the royal tombs of Ur and the Shang dynasty pits of China. But half a continent north, another civilization was burning something far smaller. Number 2. The Carthaginian Tophet. In the Salambo quarter of what is now Carthage, Tunisia, archaeologists have recovered over 20,000 cremation urns and more than 6,000 inscribed stone markers from a single sacred precinct. Each urn contains the burned remains of an infant or young child. Some contain the remains of lambs or goats, mixed with human bone fragments. The inscribed stelae are dedicated to Baal-Haman, a Canaanite deity represented by a disc and crescent, and to Tanit, known as the face of Baal, whose geometric symbol of upraised hands and triangular body dominates thousands of inscriptions across the Western Mediterranean. The standard dedication reads, "To the great lady Tanit and to the Lord Baal-Haman, what the dedicator has offered, may they hear his voice and bless him." The question that has consumed Mediterranean archaeology for over a century is whether these urns represent child sacrifice or a specialized cemetery for infants who died of natural causes. The ancient literary sources are unambiguous. Diodorus Siculus, drawing on the earlier historian Clitarchus, described Carthaginian priests placing children into the outstretched arms of a heated bronze statue. Plutarch added a specific detail. Flutes and drums were played during the ritual to mask the sound of wailing from the families of the offered children. But ancient sources are not neutral. Greek and Roman authors had every political reason to demonize Carthage. The physical evidence has produced its own war. Harvard archaeologist Lawrence Steger directed the ASOR Punic project from 1976 to 1979, excavating 445 sealed urns. University of Pittsburgh anthropologist Jeffrey Schwartz conducted the largest skeletal analysis, examining 348 urns containing the remains of 540 individuals. His finding was that most remains fell between prenatal and 5 to 6 months postnatal, with at least 20% being prenatal. He argued this age distribution mirrors natural infant mortality, but Hebrew University scholar Patricia Smith countered, with dental analysis showing deaths peaking at 1 to 1.49 months, a pattern that does not match natural mortality curves. A 2014 Oxford University study concluded the evidence overwhelmingly supports the view that this was a site of child sacrifice. The practice spanned over 600 years across 3 distinct strata: Tanit I, from roughly 750 to 600 BCE, Tanit II, from 600 to 300 BCE, and Tanit III, running until Rome destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE. Comparative data from the Tophet at Theros in Sardinia shows 98% of remains from infants under 3 months, with 47% of urns containing animal substitutes rather than humans. Carthage's animal substitution rate was lower, at roughly 31%. The debate remains one of the most contested in archaeology, but the urns kept accumulating for 6 centuries, which means whatever was happening here, it was not a crisis, it was an institution. 13,000 years earlier, in the Nile Valley, the violence was anything but institutional. Number 3. The Jebel Sahaba Massacre Cemetery. Cemetery 117 sits 3 kilometers north of Wadi Halfa on the Sudan-Egypt border. Or it did. The site has been underwater since 1970, drowned beneath Lake Nasser after the completion of the Aswan High Dam. Fred Wendorf of Southern Methodist University excavated it between 1965 and 1966 as part of the UNESCO Nubian Salvage Campaign, racing to document what the rising water would erase. He found 61 individuals buried in flexed positions, heads facing east, in what appeared to be a communal cemetery. But 21 of those individuals had stone projectile points embedded directly in their bones: rib cages, spines, skulls. Microlithic-backed bladelets, crescent-shaped points characteristic of the Kadan culture, designed with oblique cutting edges to slash tissue and cause hemorrhage. The cemetery dates to roughly 13,400 to 14,200 years ago. It is the oldest known evidence of organized human violence. For decades, the standard interpretation was a single massacre. Then, in 2021, Isabelle Crèvecoeur and colleagues at the French National Center for Scientific Research published a reanalysis in Scientific Reports that transformed the story. They identified 106 previously undocumented lesions on the skeletal remains. The critical finding was that 38 of the 61 individuals, 62.3%, bore healed wounds alongside fresh ones. These people had been attacked, survived, recovered over weeks or months, and then been attacked again. This was not one massacre. It was decades of persistent, recurring intergroup raids. The demographic profile is equally striking: 19 females and 20 males among identifiable adults, with no sex bias and injury patterns. Children showed the same proportions of weapon wounds as adults. Everyone was a target. The combat was exclusively projectile-based. No close-range blunt trauma, no defensive parrying injuries on the forearms. This was long-distance raiding, ambush tactics, arrows and thrown spears from a distance. The violence coincided with severe late Pleistocene climate change. The eastern Sahara was drying into hyper-aridity, compressing human populations into the Nile Valley, the only habitable corridor with water, fish, and vegetation. Multiple groups of hunter-fisher-gatherers were competing for the same shrinking lifeline. Wendorf donated all archives and skeletal remains to the British Museum in 2001. The bones that survived 13,000 years of burial, a dam flood, and international transfer now tell a story more nuanced and more disturbing than a single bad day. Organized warfare predates agriculture. It predates settlements. It predates civilization. It predates everything we thought made us violent. But Ethiopia holds skulls that humans processed after death in ways that remain unexplained. Number 4. The Herto Skulls. In 1997, Tim White's research team was working in the Middle Awash region of Ethiopia when they uncovered 3 skulls at a site called Herto Bori. Argon dating of the volcanic tuffs bracketing the fossils placed them between 154,000 and 160,000 years ago. At the time of publication in Nature in June 2003, they were the oldest securely dated Homo sapiens in the fossil record. The team created a new subspecies designation, Homo sapiens idaltu. Idaltu means elder in the Afar language. There are 2 nearly complete adult crania and 1 nearly complete child skull, specimen BOU-VP-16-5, aged approximately 6 to 7 years. All 3 bear evidence of deliberate post-mortem modification. Fine, deep cut marks cover the surfaces in patterns of repetitive scraping that are distinct from anything observed on animal bones at the same site. These are not butchery marks. The same people who processed hippopotamus carcasses at Herto, extracting marrow and stripping flesh with stone tools, used a completely different technique on these human skulls. The processing was careful, systematic, and limited to the cranium. The child skull shows the most dramatic modifications. The lower jaw was deliberately detached. Soft tissue at the base of the skull was removed using obsidian flakes. The foramen magnum, the opening where the spinal cord enters the skull, was broken into and its edges polished smooth. Portions of the cranial vault were worn down in a way that can only result from repeated handling over time. The polishing pattern crosses fracture lines, which proves it occurred while the skull was still whole, long before geological processes broke it. Someone held this child's skull again and again over weeks or months until their hands wore the bones smooth. Adult skull BOU-VP-16-2 shows intense modification on 15 of its 24 associated fragments. Deep cut marks on the parietals, left cheekbone, frontal bone, and occipital. The cranial capacity averaged 1,450 cubic centimeters, fully modern. These were people with brains indistinguishable from ours, engaging in behavior that we cannot definitively explain. Excarnation, the ritual removal of flesh from the dead, is documented in cultures across the world. Plastered skulls at Jericho, ancestral skull houses in Papua New Guinea. But the Herto skulls are 160,000 years old. They push the evidence for symbolic mortuary behavior back further than almost any other site. The question the evidence cannot answer is whether this was reverence or something darker. 3 million years ago, in South Africa, it was not humans doing the processing. Number 5. The Taung child's eagle death. On December 23, 1924, Raymond Dart published a paper in Nature that changed everything. He described a small skull from the Buxton Limeworks quarry near Taung in the northwest province of South Africa, roughly 130 kilometers north of Kimberley. He named it Australopithecus africanus, the first hominin species described from Africa. The Taung child was approximately 3 to 4 years old at death, and recent radiometric dating places the fossil at 2.58 million years ago. For decades, Dart believed our ancestors were violent predators. His killer ape hypothesis proposed that Australopithecines used bones as weapons and hunted their way to dominance. Then C.K. Brain dismantled that idea through meticulous taphonomic work, showing the bone damage at South African cave sites came from predators eating hominins, not hominins killing prey. But the identity of the specific predator that killed the Taung child remained uncertain, until Lee Berger and Ron Clark proposed a new suspect in 1995. Not a leopard, not a saber-toothed cat, a bird. Specifically the African crowned eagle, Stephanoides coronatus. In 2006, Berger presented the evidence. Puncture marks and ragged incisions at the base of the Taung child's eye sockets precisely match the damage pattern inflicted by crowned eagles when they rip out the eyes of primates to access brain tissue. Depressed bone flaps on the top of the skull correspond to talon strikes from above. Scott McGraw built the reference collection that made the comparison possible, analyzing 669 primate bones from 16 crowned eagle nests in the Thai forest of Ivory Coast. The damage on modern monkey skulls killed by crowned eagles is nearly identical to what the Taung child's skull shows. Crowned eagles are sit-and-wait ambush predators. They perch in concealment, then drop onto prey at extreme speed, piercing the skull with their rear talons. They carry kills to elevated feeding perches and consume them over several days. Fossilized eggshell fragments recovered from the Taung site include fragments from a large eagle species, confirming raptor nesting at the location. Isotopic analysis of 2 complete eggshells revealed distinct carbon signatures, providing chemical evidence for sustained avian predator presence during the Plio-Pleistocene. This 3-year-old child was snatched from the ground, carried into the air, and killed. The man-the-hunter narrative was not just wrong, it was backwards. For millions of years, we were the hunted. Modern crowned eagles still prey on primates in African forests today. The ecological relationship that killed the Taung child has not ended. But eagles hunted from above. At Swartkrans, the predators came from the darkness below. Number 6. The Swartkrans Predator Lair. Swartkrans Cave sits in the Gauteng province of South Africa, part of the cradle of humankind. C.K. Brain spent over 2 decades excavating the site from 1965 to 1986, recovering more than 350,000 faunal specimens and approximately 415 hominin fossils. His 1981 book, The Hunters or the Hunted, pioneered the field of taphonomy in paleoanthropology and asked a question that rewrote our understanding of early human life. Were our ancestors the predators, or were they the prey? The answer came from a single skull fragment. SK54 is a juvenile Paranthropus robustus skullcap discovered in 1949. It contains 2 puncture wounds, each 6 mm in diameter, located at the intersection of the sagittal and lambdoidal sutures on the back of the skull. The spacing between the 2 punctures is exactly 33 mm. Leopard mandible. SK349 was found in the same deposits. When Brain placed the lower canine teeth of that mandible against the skull, they fit the puncture wounds perfectly, 33 mm apart. A leopard had bitten through this child's skull from behind. Brain demonstrated experimentally that no stone tool could produce these specific marks. The cave operated as what taphonomists call a death trap. Leopards would kill hominins on the landscape, then drag the bodies into the cave to feed. Over hundreds of thousands of years, bones accumulate. Swartkrans Member 1, dating to roughly 2.2 to 1.7 million years ago, shows the heaviest predation. But leopards were not the only threat. Carbon isotope analysis from a 2000 study revealed that Meganterion, a saber-toothed cat, preferentially hunted hominins over other available prey. Dinofelis and hyenas also contributed to the bone accumulations. Limb bones show spiral fractures with carnivore tooth marks, the signature of being consumed, not butchered. Leopard feeding leaves long bones roughly 90% intact, with diagnostic pits and furrows measuring 1 to 3 millimeters. 2 hominin species suffered simultaneously. Both Paranthropus robustus and early Homo were prey at Swartkrans, the first site proving that 2 distinct hominin species coexisted and were both hunted. Then something changed. Swartkrans Member 3, dating to roughly 1 to 1.5 million years ago, contains burnt bones heated to campfire temperatures, the earliest direct evidence for controlled fire use in the hominin fossil record. Fire is completely absent from Members 1 and 2. Somewhere between Member 2 and Member 3, our ancestors figured out how to control flame. The cave that had been a death trap became a shelter. The predator's lair became a fortress. But in Zambia, there is a skull where the wound defies easy explanation. Number 7. The Kabwe Skull. On June 17, 1921, a Swiss miner named Tom Zwigler was blasting limestone at the Broken Hill zinc and lead mine in what was then northern Rhodesia. The explosion exposed a skull. Arthur Smith Woodward at the British Museum described it that same year as Homo rhodesiensis, estimating its age at 30,000 to 40,000 years. He was off by 250,000 years. In 2020, Chris Stringer and Rainer Grun published a study in Nature using electron spin resonance dating of dentin and laser ablation mass spectrometry of the occipital bone. The skull is 299,000 years old, plus or minus 25,000. What draws immediate attention is a circular lesion on the left squamous temporal bone. The hole measures approximately 8 by 8 millimeters, forming the base of a larger intracranial pit 21 millimeters across. The edges are clean, the shape is round, It looks, to an untrained eye, exactly like a bullet wound. The fringe theory has predictable appeal, a perfectly round hole in a 300,000-year-old skull, but the fringe theory fails on multiple points. There are no radial split lines, which high-velocity projectile impacts produce. There are no fracture patterns consistent with ballistic trauma, and, crucially, the edges of the lesion show signs of healing. The bone was remodeling before this individual died. Whatever made this hole, the person survived it for weeks or months afterward. Bullets do not work that way. The leading medical explanation is a chronic ear infection, otitis media, that eroded through the tegmen tympani and tracked into the temporal bone over time. A 3 mm hole in the tegmen tympani and a marked bony outgrowth on the petrous bone support this diagnosis. Histologist M. Yearsley proposed in 1928 that oral sepsis progressed to mastoiditis and Biesel's abscess. The dental evidence supports this pathway. 10 of 15 preserved teeth show cavities. 4 teeth have their crowns completely destroyed. Periapical lesions, periodontal disease, severe anterior dental wear, and hypercementosis are all present. This individual was in chronic, severe pain long before the temporal bone eroded. The skull's current taxonomic classification is Homo heidelbergensis, though Middle Pleistocene taxonomy remains fiercely debated. What is not debated is where the skull has been since 1921. London, the Natural History Museum. Zambia argues the 1912 Bushman Relics Proclamation required an export permit from the British South Africa Company that was never issued. In May 2024, UNESCO's Intergovernmental Committee backed Zambia's repatriation claim. A roadmap for return is expected at the 2026 session. The skull's revised 300,000-year date means that Africa hosted at least 3 contemporaneous hominin lineages at that time: Homo sapiens, Homo heidelbergensis, and Homo naledi. One individual's suffering in Zambia rewrites the map of who was alive and where. But in the Sahara, an entire civilization was erased. Number 8. The Gobero Stone Age Graveyard. On October 13, 2000, paleontologist Paul Sereno was in the Tenere Desert of Niger hunting for dinosaur fossils. His team was about to leave when photographer Mike Hetwer spotted bone protruding from the sand. It was not a dinosaur. It was a human grave. Then another. Then dozens. Over 2 seasons of excavation, Sereno's team uncovered approximately 200 burials spanning 5,000 years of continuous habitation in what is now one of the most lifeless landscapes on Earth. 2 distinct populations used the site. The Kifian, who lived there between 10,000 and 8,000 years before present, were hunter-fishers of extraordinary stature, some reaching 6 feet 8 inches tall. They speared enormous Nile perch with bone harpoons in lakes that no longer exist. Then the Sahara dried. For over 1,000 years, from roughly 6,200 to 5,200 BCE, the site was uninhabitable. When the rains returned, a completely different population moved in. The Tenerian, living between 7,000 and 4,500 years before present, were smaller in stature and practiced a mixed economy of hunting, fishing, and cattle herding. 78 direct AMS radiocarbon dates from bones and teeth confirm the chronology with precision. The most haunting find is a triple burial from the Tenerian period. A woman and 2 children, approximately 5 and 7 years old, buried together. Their arms are intertwined. Their hands are clasped. The woman's right arm curls under one child's head. Her left arm reaches toward the other child's hand. Pollen clusters found directly beneath the skeletons prove they were laid on a prepared bed of flowers. 4 arrowheads were placed in the grave as offerings. The care is overwhelming. The tenderness crosses 5,000 years without losing any of its force. Gobero sat near the western edge of Mega Chad, an ancient inland sea roughly 10 times the size of modern Lake Chad. The surrounding landscape was a savanna of lakes and rivers, supporting fish, hippos, and grasslands. The artifacts tell the story. Bone harpoons, fish hooks, 16,188 stone tools, decorated pottery with wavy line and pointillistic patterns, ostrich eggshell beads, ivory jewelry, a hippo ivory pendant necklace from an elderly woman's burial. This was a rich, well-nourished community. Dental and skeletal health indicators confirm both populations were thriving. The horror at Gobero is not violence, it is erasure. The Green Sahara, the African humid period lasting roughly 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, ended. The lakes evaporated, the rivers vanished, the grasslands turned to sand. Everything these people knew, everything they built, everything they loved was swallowed by the desert. The woman and her children lie in an embrace beneath sand that stretches to every horizon, and there is nothing alive for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. But deep underground in South Africa, bodies were placed where no living person should be able to reach. Number 9. Homo naledi in Rising Star Cave. In September 2013, recreational cavers Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker were exploring the Rising Star Cave system in the Cradle of Humankind, South Africa. They squeezed through a vertical chute 12 meters long, averaging 20 centimeters wide, with a minimum clearance of 18 centimeters. In complete darkness, at the bottom of a passage that would challenge the thinnest adult human alive, they found a chamber littered with bones. Lee Berger announced the discovery in September 2015. A new species, Homo naledi, represented by over 1,500 fossil specimens from at least 15 individuals, including infants, juveniles, and adults. It was the largest hominin assemblage ever recovered from a single African site. The excavation required a specially recruited team of 6 small-bodied researchers called the Underground Astronauts: Marina Elliott, Becca Peixoto, Aliyah Gertov, Ellen Feuerriegel, Lindsay Hunter, and Hannah Morris. They were chosen specifically because they could fit through an 18-centimeter gap. Homo naledi's brain was tiny. Cranial volume ranged from 465 to 610 cubic centimeters, averaging roughly 500, one-third the size of a modern human brain. Comparable to Australopithecus, which lived millions of years earlier. But the anatomy was a mosaic that defied categorization. Primitive shoulders, hips, and torso. Modern hands, wrists, feet, and bipedal lower limbs. And then the dating papers landed in 2017. Electron spin resonance, uranium thorium, and paleomagnetic methods placed Homo naledi at 236,000 to 335,000 years ago. Not millions of years old, not even 500,000. These small-brained hominins were alive at the same time as early Homo sapiens, walking the same continent. Sediment analysis of the Naledi chamber showed no evidence of water transport, no natural cavity infilling, no slumping. Articulated skeletal regions with preserved joints suggest the bodies were covered before decomposition. The bones appear to have been deliberately placed. A second deposit, the Lair chamber, geologically separated from the first, yielded another 131 specimens, including a near-complete cranium. In 2023, Berger's team published preprints in eLife claiming evidence of deliberate burial with grave goods, fire use for illumination, and symbolic rock art. The scientific community pushed back hard. Michael Petralia and colleagues at Griffith University argued the alleged stone tool near a hominin hand could be a geofact. Peer reviewers were unanimous that the evidence was inadequate. None of the alleged burials had been fully excavated. But even without the 2023 claims, the core mystery remains. How did 15 or more individuals end up in a chamber that requires passing through an 18-centimeter chute in total darkness? The leading hypothesis is still deliberate disposal. A species with a brain one-third our size appears to have carried or pushed its dead into the most inaccessible place it could find. The cognitive implications are staggering. And the last item on this list raises questions about events beyond human comprehension entirely. Number 10. The Libyan Desert Glass. In December 1932, Patrick Clayton of the Egyptian Geological Survey was conducting surveys on the Sad Plateau, south of the Great Sand Sea, when he found translucent yellow-green glass scattered across the desert surface. The glass was distributed over approximately 6,500 square kilometers along the Egypt-Libya border, with individual specimens ranging from a few centimeters to the largest known piece at roughly 26 kilograms. Chemical analysis revealed silica concentrations of 97.38 to 98.25 weight percent, among the purest natural glass on Earth. The primary mineral is lechatelierite, an amorphous form of silicon dioxide that forms only under extreme conditions. Radiometric dating places the glass at approximately 29 million years old. The temperatures required to produce this glass range from 1600 to 2000 degrees Celsius at minimum, with crystalline inclusions like cubic zirconia forming only at 2250 to 2700 degrees. For context, the fireball at Hiroshima reached approximately 3000 to 4000 degrees. Whatever created the Libyan desert glass generated temperatures in the range of a nuclear detonation across thousands of square kilometers 29 million years before any hominin walked the earth. The event remained a geological curiosity until 1998, when Italian mineralogist Vincenzo Di Michele identified the yellow-green scarab carved into the center of Tutankhamun's breastplate pectoral as Libyan desert glass. Howard Carter had cataloged the scarab as chalcedony when he discovered the tomb in the 1920s. It took 76 years to realize that a pharaoh's most sacred jewelry contained a piece of glass forged by a cosmic event almost 30 million years before his civilization existed. Three hypotheses compete. The meteorite impact model proposes a direct collision that melted the desert into glass. Farouk El-Baz and Iman Ghanem identified the Gobero crater in 2007 via satellite imagery, a double-ring structure approximately 31 kilometers across. But oxygen isotope analysis of sandstone samples shows significant compositional differences from the glass. The Gobero connection remains unconfirmed. The atmospheric airburst model proposes an object exploding in the air above the desert, radiating heat downward like a cosmic flashbulb. Jan Kramers and his team published research in 2013 analyzing a diamond-bearing pebble they named Hypatia, which showed chemical signatures consistent with a comet nucleus, including carbon as the dominant element, less than 5% silicates, and abundant microscopic diamonds. Their conclusion was a comet airburst approximately 28.5 million years ago. But recent mineralogical evidence complicates even this elegant solution. Rhyodite, a high-pressure zircon polymorph, has been found in Libyan desert glass samples. Rhyodite forms only under the extreme pressures generated by direct meteorite impact, not atmospheric airbursts. The mystery remains genuinely unresolved. An event of nuclear weapon intensity struck the Sahara 29 million years ago, scattered glass across thousands of square kilometers, left a piece in a pharaoh's tomb, and did not leave a confirmed crater. Early humans recognized the glass's superior flaking properties and used it to make stone tools roughly 10,000 years ago. Egypt now bans its export as a protected cultural resource, but the event itself remains beyond explanation. The 10 items on this list span 29 million years, from a cosmic event that predates all primates to the fall of Carthage in 146 BCE. But what they share is a single thread. Africa holds the full record of what humans became. The Taung child and Swartkrans tell us we were food before we were anything else. Eagles and leopards did not see our ancestors as special. The Herto Skulls show us the first evidence that we began to treat our own dead with deliberate, symbolic attention 160,000 years ago. Whether that attention was reverence or something else remains an open question. Jebel Sahaba proves that organized violence between human groups began long before agriculture, long before settlements, long before anyone could argue that civilization made us cruel. The cruelty predates civilization by 10,000 years. And then there is the trajectory, from prey to predator to self-predator. Swartkrans Member 3 introduces fire. Jebel Sahaba introduces organized raids. Kerma introduces state-sanctioned sacrifice on a scale that rivals anything in the ancient world. The Carthaginian Tophet institutionalized child death for over 600 years. The capacity for horror scaled with the capacity for organization. But Gobero complicates that narrative. The triple burial, a woman and 2 children clasped together on a bed of flowers, demonstrates that the same species that killed 300 people in Kerma's corridors was also capable of arranging flowers beneath its dead. The horror and the tenderness come from the same brain. Africa is not a backdrop to human history. It is the source code. The continent where we were hunted, where we learned to hunt, where we first processed our dead, where we first killed each other in organized groups, and where we first buried our loved ones with flowers. Every one of these 10 items was unknown 150 years ago. The Kabwe Skull's repatriation to Zambia, backed by UNESCO in 2024, is a reminder that the story is not just scientific but political. Africa's heritage has been taken, housed in European museums, and studied by institutions that did not ask permission. That is changing, slowly. Homo naledi's Rising Star Cave cannot be fully excavated with current technology. The Jebel Sahaba cemetery is underwater. The Libyan desert glass field has no confirmed source crater. What we still do not know almost certainly dwarfs what we have found, and what is still buried beneath African soil is, by every measure, more extraordinary than anything on this list.